What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Dillian Whyte, 27 wins and 3 losses and 1 no contest, taking on Jermaine Franklin, 21 wins and 0 losses. Dillian Whyte is the former title challenger who is coming off of 2 out of 3 stoppage losses. That's one thing that I want to keep in mind when analyzing Whyte versus Franklin here. But there's a clear A side and B side to this fight. This is a huge step up fight for Jermaine Franklin. I mean, the best guys I would say he's fought to date are probably Jerry Forrest. Whereas Dillian Whyte, I mean, he's fought everybody from Anthony Joshua, who for a long time was Dillian Whyte's only loss until he got knocked out cold with a vicious uppercut from Alexander Povetkin. That was like 5 years after the Joshua stoppage. So he went on a great streak between the Joshua loss and then the loss to Alexander Povetkin, a loss that he then avenged in the very next fight, stopping Povetkin in the 4th round. Povetkin knocked him out in the 5th round. He came back and then knocked Povetkin out in the 4th round. And so Dillian Whyte has had just a ton of experience relative to Jermaine Franklin. Jermaine Franklin, by the way, is from Saginaw, Michigan. For you NBA fans, that's the hometown of Golden State Warriors All-Star Draymond Green. But the stakes in Whyte versus Franklin are pretty huge. And that's because Dillian Whyte, if he wins this fight against Jermaine Franklin, he will basically be right in line to face Anthony Joshua, the 2-time former champion, immediately following this fight against Franklin. Eddie Hearn, the promoter of both guys, has indicated as such. That's what Eddie Hearn is looking to line up next for Anthony Joshua, just based on what he said in recent interviews, which really puts just a ton of pressure on Dillian Whyte, because you could argue that if Dillian Whyte beats Jermaine Franklin, that this rematch against Anthony Joshua could be the biggest payday of Dillian Whyte's career, perhaps even bigger than the payday that he received in his very last fight against Tyson Fury, a fight where he really never got anything going. I mean, the Gypsy King was keeping him on the outside and then just caught him with a beautiful uppercut. Great setup, threw the uppercut for it was one of the first times that whole fight that Tyson Fury even let that uppercut go. It just seemed like he had Dillian Whyte thinking about every punch but the uppercut, and then he unleashed the uppercut and finished the fight. It was pretty brilliant. And keep in mind, it was an uppercut that Alexander Povetkin unleashed against Dillian Whyte to knock him out as well. So there seems to be a little bit of vulnerability to that uppercut. In fact, Jermaine Franklin has stated that he wants to knock Dillian Whyte out with an uppercut. Now, as far as Jermaine Franklin, who again doesn't have nearly the experience of Dillian Whyte, I've seen a vulnerability in Jermaine Franklin because he drops. I mean, both of these guys are right-handed. They're both orthodox. And Jermaine Franklin, when he starts letting his hands go, his combinations go, and by the way, this is 6'4" Dillian Whyte versus 6'1.5", 6'2" Jermaine Franklin. And Dillian Whyte often comes in the ring at like 250 plus pounds, especially in recent years. And Jermaine Franklin, built very broad, robust, but because of the height, he's about maybe 240, just over 240. But Jermaine Franklin does seem to be a pretty good boxer. He, again, he's undefeated. He beat Rydell Booker. Now, this is after Rydell Booker has spent over 10 years in prison. He was out of the ring like 13, 14 years, tried to mount a comeback, but by then he was like in his late 30s. Rydell Booker won a couple of fights, then fought Jermaine Franklin and lost via decision. Jermaine Franklin, again, also has a split decision win over Jerry Forrest, who we've seen compete well against Zhang Li. That's the guy who many thought just beat Filip Ergovich, although Ergovich was granted the decision win. Jermaine Franklin's also fought to a draw with Michael Hunter, but then he really disappointed in a recent fight against a 40-plus-year-old Kubrat Pulev. So Jerry Forrest, decent to good fighter, not a great fighter, but Jermaine Franklin does have a win against him. Close fight, split decision. They were really whacking each other, especially in the trenches. But when Jermaine Franklin really starts letting his hands go, he tends to drop his right hand. And you could argue that Dillian Whyte's best punch is a left hook. Now, Dillian Whyte's got a very good jab. Neither of these guys will be mistaken for Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, Tyson Fury, or anybody who's exercised good footwork, or at least fast, fleet of footwork over the years. Nah, these guys are more or less stationary, and they are sweet science style fighters. They both have a good jab. They both throw a good double jab to then close the distance and to get the harder punches off. they both like to throw hard left hooks. So they'll get in with the jab, sometimes a double jab, then they'll throw the right hand, follow it up with the left hook. It's a pretty, typical combination, but because of their natural skill set, it just lends itself to both of these guys being what online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer would call mid-range hookers, where they're looking to fight pretty much in mid-range and let those, kind of short hooks go. Now, again, Dillian Whyte's got a great left hook, and he'll mix it up. I mean, he was tagging Oscar Rivas to the body and going up top with the hook. And, I mean, look at how many times he just hit Povetkin flush with that left hook. Ended up finishing him with left hooks. Yeah, he has some straight rights going, and yes, it was all set up with the nice jab and double jab. But it's really the left hook that will get the opponent out of there for Dillian Whyte. And that just doesn't bode well to Jermaine Franklin dropping his right hand, especially when he starts getting into the, the firefight part of the fight. And I anticipate that Whyte versus Franklin is going to be a high action fight. I mean, is it pretty safe to bet that the Dillian Whyte fight's going to have a lot of action in it? I mean, damn, just go rewatch or watch his 2 fights against Derek Chisora. But it just is a bad style clash when you consider Jermaine Franklin, again, dropping the right hand, which can create the opening for the left hook, especially when they are both throwing like 3 to 4 punch combinations, which I expect them to. I think this is going to heat up relatively quickly. I mean, neither of these guys really back up a ton. They are both relatively patient hunters, though. I mean, once the temperature increases, they're both willing to engage in that firefight. But more or less, if it's up to them, they both look like they would technically set up hard punches behind a jab. It just so happens that their opponents are usually, somewhat close in skill level to where the fight, I wouldn't say it devolves into a firefight, but they basically both of them find themselves often trading long combinations with a bunch of hard punches. So if this starts turning into one of those firefights, I just think that Dillian Whyte's got the superior power in this case. Like, the guy dropped Joseph Parker, beat Joseph Parker. You could argue that Dillian Whyte's best win to date is against Joseph Parker. Granted, one of those 2 knockdowns was because of like a forearm, or was it a headbutt or a forearm? But it was something that was not a punch that hit Joseph Parker and clearly like rocked him to where when Parker got up, he still seemed to be a little bit unsteady. But the other knockdown that Dillian Whyte scored against Joseph Parker was legit. It was a punch. And Dillian Whyte isn't the type of fighter who, aside from the Tyson Fury fight, Dillian Whyte is usually winning as many or more of the rounds of the fights that he's involved in. In fact, even when he got knocked out with that uppercut against Alexander Povetkin, rewatch that fight. Dillian Whyte dropped Povetkin like multiple times before getting knocked out himself. He was winning the rounds. He was winning the fight. It was just one punch that just changed everything, which happens in the heavyweight division. I just don't think Jermaine Franklin has that type of Alexander Povetkin power, nor does he have the Anthony Joshua power. And again, this is just a huge step up in class for Jermaine Franklin. Now, one of the wild cards here that I'm thinking about is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that Dillian Whyte is coming off of 2 out of his last 3 fights, resulting in a knockout loss for Dillian Whyte. You just never know when that switch is flipped and when a fighter ends up becoming a shell of themselves because of the damage accumulated. You just don't know when that happens. Dillian Whyte, he's not super old, especially by heavyweight standards. He's still 34 years old. Jermaine Franklin is only 29 years old. So Jermaine Franklin's looking to, make this kind of his moment to elevate or catapult himself into getting bigger fights in the future. I think that he will make these early rounds competitive. I think you are going to see sparks fly. I think both of these guys are going to, whack each other pretty viciously. I don't think that Dillian Whyte is necessarily going to get dropped. I do think Dillian Whyte is going to drop Jermaine Franklin. Whether he finishes Jermaine Franklin, that's another question. But I do think that he's going to drop Jermaine Franklin. However, when Dillian Whyte gets hurt, he doesn't really recover that damn well. I mean, he's been in a lot of wars where he has, won battles of attrition. But, if you see the way that he got hurt against Joseph Parker in the 12th round of their fight, again, a fight that Dillian Whyte won, he just looked like if that fight went 1 or 2 more rounds, that he was on the verge of getting stopped. When he got hurt against Anthony Joshua, he didn't really recover that well, and he was competitive. He hurt Joshua early in the fight that they had back in 2015. But Dillian Whyte does get hurt and does get hurt badly. I just don't think that at this time, Jermaine Franklin is the guy to do it. But again, they're going to have a lot of moments, I believe, that they're going to be in pretty close quarters, both letting both fists go. Another point of reference, by the way, for Dillian Whyte, I was thinking, like, who is similar to Jermaine Franklin in terms of who he's fought in the last few years? I was thinking maybe Oscar Rivas, but I think Oscar Rivas is a little bit more like, he's a little more athletic in terms of jumping into the pocket and letting hard punches go. But rewatch Whyte versus Rivas. That was a very good fight. Some thought that Rivas should have maybe edged that decision, but it was a unanimous decision win for Dillian Whyte. And it would probably be worth a rewatch or a watch of Jermaine Franklin versus Jerry Forrest. That's a very good fight. Not to say that Dillian Whyte and Jerry Forrest are a ton alike. I mean, Jerry Forrest is a southpaw, Dillian Whyte's orthodox. So there's really nobody the caliber of Dillian Whyte on Jermaine Franklin's resume. So I think that skills will pay the bills. I think that, experience will win the day. I was going to go Dillian Whyte via stoppage. And, I still think that that's a high possibility, especially when you think of how this fight is likely to be fought. I actually came into the video thinking that I was going to go Dillian Whyte via decision, but I actually think he's going to get a mid to late round stoppage here against Jermaine Franklin. I mean, I've just seen Jermaine Franklin get hit too cleanly in a lot of cases. And yes, he has shown durability. Yes, he's shown a pretty good chin, but Dillian Whyte hits pretty damn hard. It's just that if you look at Dillian Whyte's fight schedule, he's always in there with somebody who's like at least a B+ or better. Like, he's fought Robert Helenius. I mean, his bad fights, like the bad opponents that he's gone against, relatively speaking, were like Mariusz Vok. And that's that, huge mountain of a man. And Dillian Whyte was coming off of the suspension where he was then, exonerated of wrongdoing PEDs wise. In that case, I think he had tested positive for PEDs back in the day as well. So I think that was like his second alleged offense at the time. But when he returned to fight Mariusz Vok, that was probably the worst opponent that he's had, I would say, in the past 4 years at least. Like, it would either be Vok or an aging Lucas Brown, who we recently just saw knock Junior Fa out. So, it's been all killer, no filler when it comes to Dillian Whyte's fight-by-fight schedule. So that will kind of damper your knockout percentage. But even so, like, out of Dillian Whyte's 27 wins, he still has 18 via knockout. So the guy carries a lot of punch. And again, in a much lesser schedule, opponent quality-wise, in the young career of Jermaine Franklin, relatively young career of Jermaine Franklin, 14 of his 21 wins have come via knockout. But again, I just think that there's too much of a hole in Jermaine Franklin's game to where I just think that even if you've been working on keeping that right hand up, I think that when the boxing match turns into a fight and both guys start letting a lot of punches go and the temperature rises, I think you start reverting back to old habits. And I can see Jermaine Franklin getting caught cleanly too many times against somebody who hits as hard as Dillian Whyte. Again, Jermaine Franklin is a pretty big dude, not super tall, but big. Dillian Whyte's even bigger. Jermaine Franklin's got decent to good power. Dillian Whyte's got better power. And again, the vast experience. So unless Dillian Whyte is a shot fighter or a near shot fighter, I think that he should win here. And I'm going to go, again, Dillian Whyte via late stoppage. We're talking maybe 9th round, 8th round, something like that. So not super late in the fight, 11th, 12th round. I think it's going to be more like 8th, 9th round stoppage for Dillian Whyte. And again, the pressure's on because this is going to be the payday of a lifetime for Dillian Whyte if he wins that. So we'll see how he responds to the pressure. He was under a ton of pressure in that rematch against Alexander Povetkin after the knockout loss to Povetkin, where basically his career was kind of on the line in terms of, hey, if you ever want that title shot that you have been the mandatory for like a couple of years at least, you've got to win that rematch against Alexander Povetkin, and boy did he. So I think that Dillian Whyte can handle the pressure. I think that he's highly motivated here. I just believe that he knows what's at stake, and I am going to pick him to beat the, pretty promising, pretty damn good, but not ready to beat a Dillian Whyte just yet, in my opinion, Jermaine Franklin. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Dillian Whyte versus Jermaine Franklin in the comments. And if Dillian Whyte does pull this off and handle business against Jermaine Franklin, do you think that he has a good shot at beating Anthony Joshua later on in that would be like mid 2023 or maybe like spring of 2023, I'm assuming? Do you think Dillian Whyte's got a good shot at beating Anthony Joshua in the rematch? And keep in mind, it will have been about 8 years since the first time they fought. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.